Hey everybody, welcome to the last lab video for AP2, which is on reproductive histology. And we're actually only going to do two reproductive organs. We're going to look at the testes and we're going to look at the ovaries. So we're going to look at a male organ, male gonad, and a female gonad. And we've got our testes right here, and this is kind of like a zoomed out view. And what we see here are two things. Okay, we see the internal structure of the testes here, as well as its connective tissue capsule. And so this pinkish area, lots of collagen in here. This is the tunica albuginea, which is basically the connective tissue wrapping around the testes. Now what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on the testicular tissue itself. So let's go ahead and do that. And if I do that, what I'm going to see here is this tube. This is known as a seminiferous tubule. I've got it outlined in green here. This is a seminiferous tubule. I've got part of another seminiferous tubule over here and little bits of other ones over on kind of like surrounding it. So this is a seminiferous tubule right here, okay? Seminiferous tubules are the sites of sperm production. The majority of the cells in this seminiferous tubule here are in some stage of sperm production. Now, before we get into those cells, let's also notice that we've got this little triangular cluster of cells here that are in between the seminiferous tubules. These guys, because they're in between, they're known as interstitial cells, and their primary function is the production of testosterone. All right, back to the seminiferous tubule. The seminiferous tubule is the site of sperm production. And we're going to see a variety of cells in different stages of sperm development. And sperm development is going to proceed from the outside to the inside. So sperm development is going to go in this direction, with our least developed cells to the outside and our most developed cells to the inside. Now, the first initial cell in the process of sperm production, which of course you know is called spermatogenesis, the first cell is this guy called a spermatogonium. And we find the spermatogonia in the outside of the seminiferous tubule, like the outer layer of the seminiferous tubule is where I'm going to have spermatogonia. So all of these cells I'm arrowing here are spermatogonia. And they are the first cell in this process of spermatogenesis. Now what happens is each spermatogonium is going to go on and become a primary spermatocyte. And a primary spermatocyte is found just a little bit more to the inside. So like this guy right here, this is a primary spermatocyte. So it's like if we go to the next row of cells in, we've got primary spermatocytes. Primary spermatocytes often a little bit bigger, often have a bigger nucleus. So a spermatogonium becomes a primary spermatocyte. Then a primary spermatocyte is going to divide. And when the primary spermatocyte divides, we get a pair of secondary spermatocytes. And then those secondary spermatocytes are going to divide. And we get two pair of these cells called spermatids. And then spermatids divide. Spermatids don't divide. Spermatids change their shape. And each spermatid becomes a sperm cell. So from one spermatogonium, we end up getting 4 sperm cells. So spermatogonium becomes primary spermatocyte, which divide to give me secondary spermatocytes, which then divide to give me spermatids, which then become sperm cells or spermatozoa. Now notice I did not include secondary spermatocytes in my list here because they don't last very long. They're going to divide really quickly. So it's hard to like kind of catch them on the microscopic image here. but we do see lots of spermatids. Good rule of thumb here is, like, once you're past the two outer layers, anything else in here that looks like a normal regular cell is going to be a spermatid. And then all of these guys with their flattened nuclei and their tails or flagella extending inward, these guys are all the sperm cells or spermatozoa. So this whole thing is a seminiferous tubule. It is the site of spermatogenesis. Next to a seminiferous tubule, I will find interstitial cells, which make testosterone. As I look at a seminiferous tubule, I will see cells in different stages of spermatogenesis, going from outside to inside. In my outer rim, I'm going to find a cell called a spermatogonium. A little bit closer in, I'm going to find a primary spermatocyte. Then I'm going to find a bunch of spermatids. And then finally, I see a bunch of sperm cells all in here. Okay, let's look at another one of these. So I've got another set of seminiferous tubules here. Like, here's the lumen of a seminiferous tubule down here. Here is the wall of the seminiferous tubule right here. Got some interstitial cells over here. So outer layer is the spermatogonia. Then I go in and I find these big primary spermatocytes. Then these guys are going to be spermatids. And then these guys down here are going to be sperm cells. So, good news is we're done with the male. We're done with the testy. So let's take a look at the ovary now. Now, of course, remember, the ovary is going to be the female primary sex organ, the female gonad. It's going to make oocytes, it's going to make estrogens, it's going to make progesterone. And we're going to be primarily looking at the cortex of the ovary. We actually see an outer layer of epithelium here called the germinal epithelium. So that is like a simple cuboidal epithelium on the very outside of the ovary. And then deep to it, where I've got the red arrow, that is the connective tissue capsule of the ovary, which is called the tunica albuginea, same name that we had for the testy. And so then this is all ovarian cortex that we're looking at here. We're kind of zooming in on ovarian cortex. And in the ovarian cortex, we are going to see ovarian follicles. And ovarian follicles are going to consist of an oocyte and surrounding supporting cells. And remember from lecture that we've got different types of follicles, including primordial follicles, which are our least developed. This is a primordial follicle right here. This is another one right here. Got another one over here. A primordial follicle consists of a primary oocyte. So there's the nucleus of it. There's the cytoplasm right there. Another primary oocyte over here, surrounded by a single layer of supporting cells. So this is a primordial follicle right here. Another one right here. And they're often bunched together. There's a couple of them over here. Now, primordial follicles, the most likely thing to happen to a primordial follicle is it'll die. But some primordial follicles will become primary follicles. This is a primary follicle right here. I see a primary oocyte inside it. There's the nucleus. There's the cytoplasm right there. Okay, so I'm back. I just paused my video because a kid came in, and I got no idea what I was talking about. Totally lost my train of thought. So anyway, let's see if we can get it back. This is a primary follicle right here. It has a primary oocyte with its nucleus, and it's called a multilaminar primary follicle because of its many layers of supporting cells. So Remember that during every menstrual cycle, some primordial follicles begin the journey and become primary follicles. And we see a primary follicle here. Of course, the most likely thing to happen to a primary follicle is that it will die. All right, so we got some good stuff on this ovary here. Let's look at another ovary. So again, this is the outside. This is the germinal epithelium here. This is the tunica albuginea. And I see a lot of primordial follicles, just a whole bunch of primordial follicles in here. Primordial follicles, as always, consist of a primary oocyte and a single layer of supporting cells. I also see another primary follicle. So again, here's the oocyte, here's its nucleus, and of course it's a primary oocyte. And then these are the supporting cells around it. All right, I got kind of like a zoom in up close picture of just a lot of primordial follicles. So here's a primary oocyte, here's a primary oocyte, and then kind of hard to see, but there are simple squamous supporting cells around it. Here I've got even more follicles. I've got some primordial follicles here. I've got some primary follicles with the green that have a single layer of supporting cells. Primary follicles over here as well. Again, primary oocyte, and supporting cells around it. Some more primordial follicles here. Check those out. Another nice primary follicle. Here's the primary oocyte. Here are the supporting cells. Now, if a primary follicle does not die, it might go on and get bigger, like this one. This is a really nice primary follicle here. Another nice one here. And then eventually a primary follicle might turn into a secondary follicle. It becomes a secondary follicle when it starts to develop a space within its supporting cells. And this space is called an antrum. So these are all supporting cells here. These are cells that are going to start making estrogens. This is a developing space called an antrum. And this is the primary oocyte here. Now that antrum is going to grow and get bigger. This is still a secondary follicle though, because the antrum is not a dominant structure yet. Primary oocyte, supporting cells making more estrogens. Now, most secondary follicles are going to die, but typically during every cycle we do end up with one Graafian follicle. A Graafian follicle is a mature follicle, also called a tertiary follicle. It has a big antrum. Notice I could pick up the oocyte and put it several times over in this antrum. Lots of supporting cells that are making lots of estrogens. And this is the follicle that is going to undergo ovulation. So right before ovulation, the primary oocyte finishes meiosis 1, gives us a secondary oocyte. The follicle bulges from the ovarian wall. It ruptures the the secondary oocyte that this has become, and its immediate surrounding cells get ovulated away. Now, the remaining bits of the follicle post-ovulation turn into this thing. This is called a corpus luteum. Literally means yellow body, because that's how it appears in the gross viewing. This is a corpus luteum. It's what the Graafian follicle turns into after ovulation. By the way, notice we got a couple other follicles here. Here's a nice secondary one. This is one that's like kind of on the cusp of becoming a Graafian follicle here. And this is a corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is a post-ovulation structure created by the ruptured follicle. And the job of the corpus luteum is just to make a ton of progesterone, because after ovulation, the body is assuming it's going to get pregnant, so it's making a lot of progesterone to prepare for what it thinks is an inevitable pregnancy. So this is a corpus luteum here. Pretty much if you know you're looking at an ovary, because, oh, hey, these are follicles, right? If you know you're looking at the ovary and you see some big structure, it's often clear looking like this. It's often pale because it's making, the steroids is making progesterone, gives it a pale appearance, and that is a corpus luteum. This is a humongous corpus luteum. This is a corpus luteum of pregnancy right here. And this is just making a ton of progesterone. So I think this is our last slide. I know this is a quick video. Just make sure you can identify all the different follicle types for the ovary, as well as the tunica albuginea and the germinal epithelium. And then make sure you can identify these seminiferous tubule and the interstitial cells, and then also the different cells we looked at for the testes. So histology is not that bad. We didn't go into, I didn't go into a great deal in terms of explaining the physiology of what's going on here. I was more interested in just kind of pointing out all the structures to you. As always, if you have any questions, give me a holler, email, or come see me in open lab after class, whatever. And yeah, I'll see you later. Bye.